My name is Jennifer Watson, and I'm a typical 62-year-old American grandmother. My husband Robert and I are enjoying a quiet retirement in Willow Grove, a small suburban town in Pennsylvania. Robert is 64 and retired from teaching last year. These days, he volunteers at the local library and tends to his vegetable garden in the backyard. I work part-time at a nearby bakery. I love being surrounded by the aroma of freshly baked bread and chatting with the locals. We have one son, Michael. He's 38 and works as an accountant in Philadelphia. Michael married Sarah, who worked at the same company 10 years ago. Soon after, they had an adorable baby boy, Aiden. Aiden turned 10 this year and is a bright kid who excels in science at school. Usually, Michael and his family would come to our house about once a month for Sunday brunch. Aiden loves my homemade blueberry pancakes and always says, "Grandma's pancakes are the best in the world." Hearing that always warms my heart. However, for the past 6 months, we haven't heard from Michael. For the first month, I didn't worry, thinking, he must be busy with work. But as 2 months passed, then 3, with no word, I grew concerned. I called several times, but only got his voicemail. Even when I left messages, there was no response. "Robert, something's not right," I said to my husband one evening during dinner. "I wonder if Michael and his family are having problems." Robert put down his fork and replied seriously, "You're right. He might be busy with work, but 6 months of silence is certainly unusual." I sighed. Aiden's birthday has passed too. We usually always hear from them then. "Ah, Aiden's birthday," Robert frowned. "You're right to be worried. Why don't we go visit them in person?" I hesitated at that suggestion. But showing up unannounced. "Jenny," Robert gently took my hand. "They're family. It's natural to visit if we're worried." His words encouraged me. "You're right. Let's go tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. Was there a problem in Michael and Sarah's relationship? Was something troubling at work? Or had something happened to Aiden? Various possibilities raced through my mind, and my anxiety only grew. Looking out the window, I saw the full moon shining brightly. I could hear the creaking of the garden swing in the wind, illuminated by the moonlight. Memories of Aiden playing on that swing when he was little came flooding back. I could almost hear his innocent laughter, and it made my heart ache. "It'll be all right," I told myself. "I'm sure everything's fine. We'll see them all laughing together tomorrow." Reassuring myself like this, I finally drifted off to sleep. Tomorrow's visit would reveal everything. The next morning, Robert and I got up early and headed to Michael's house. It's about an hour's drive. A cold wind blew, signaling the end of autumn, with trees lining both sides of the road in their fall colors. Usually, I would enjoy this beautiful scenery, but today my heart was too full of worry to even notice the view outside the window. "It'll be okay, Jenny," Robert said as he drove. "I'm sure it's nothing." I nodded silently, but in my heart, I was imagining the worst. When we arrived at Michael's house, the first thing I noticed was the unkempt yard. The lawn, usually neatly trimmed, was overgrown, and leaves were scattered everywhere. The potted plants that should have been on the porch were nowhere to be seen. "This is odd," I frowned. Sarah always kept the yard so tidy. We approached the front door and rang the doorbell. But there was no answer. We rang again, but still no sound came from inside the house. "The car's here," Robert pointed to the driveway. Indeed, Michael's car was parked there. "They must be home," I said, and this time knocked on the door. "Michael. Sarah. Aiden. Is anyone there?" But still, there was no response. As our anxiety grew, Robert peered through a window. "There doesn't seem to be anyone inside," he shook his head. Just then, we heard a noise coming from the direction of the garage. It was faint, but we definitely heard something. "I think someone's there," I said, heading towards the garage. Standing in front of the garage door, I took a deep breath. Then, nervously, I knocked on the door. "Is anyone there?" After a moment, a small voice came from inside. Who is it?" I recognized that voice. It was definitely Aiden's. "Aiden?" "It's Grandma," I answered in a slightly louder voice. After a moment of silence, the garage door slowly opened. There stood Aiden, looking thin and pale. "Aiden!" I cried out in surprise. "What's wrong? Why are you in the garage?" Aiden looked up at me with frightened eyes. "Grandma." I instinctively hugged him. His body was cold and trembling. "It's okay. Grandma's here now." Looking inside the garage, I saw sleeping bags, dishes, books, and other items scattered around. Children's drawings were stuck to the walls, and in the corner was a small table and chair. It looked as if this had become his room. "Aiden," I asked in a shaky voice, "have you been living here?" Aiden nodded. "Yes, for about 6 months now." 6 months. I was shocked. "But why? Where are your mom and dad?" Aiden answered with a face on the verge of tears. "Mom left. Dad's always working." I felt my body shake with anger. How did no one notice? The neighbors. The teachers at school. And most of all, what was Michael thinking? "Aiden, let's go inside the house," I said quietly but firmly. Once inside, the house was a mess. Dust had accumulated in the living room, and dirty dishes were piled high in the kitchen. The lack of a lived-in feeling throughout the house told the story of the tragedy that had unfolded here. "Aiden, where's your dad?" I asked. "Work, probably," Aiden answered in a small voice. I took out my cell phone and called Michael. After several rings, he finally answered. "Hello?" His voice sounded tired. "Michael." I couldn't contain my anger and shouted. "Come home right now." "Mom? What's wrong?" Michael sounded surprised. "What's wrong?" "Aiden has been living in the garage for 6 months." I heard Michael gasp on the other end of the line. I understand. I'll come home right away. After hanging up, I turned to Aiden. He was looking at me with frightened eyes. It's okay, Aiden, I spoke gently. Grandma's here now. Everything will be all right from now on. I promise. Aiden nodded slightly and nestled close to me. I hugged him and stroked his head. And in my heart, I made a vow. No matter what, I would protect this child. While we were focused on comforting Aiden, we quietly spent time in the living room waiting for Michael to return. Robert was gently talking to Aiden, reading him his favorite book. Watching this scene, I was overcome with complex emotions. Anger, sadness, and deep regret. Why didn't we notice sooner? About an hour later, we heard the front door open. Michael had returned. When I saw him, I was even more shocked. His beard was unkempt, his eyes were red and bloodshot, and he had clearly lost weight. There was no trace of the once dashing son I remembered. Michael, I said, my voice trembling as I stood up. When Michael saw us, he flinched for a moment. Then, upon seeing Aiden, he collapsed to the floor. Aiden. Dad is, really. Unable to form words, Michael broke down in tears. I placed my hand on Michael's shoulder and said quietly, Michael, let's talk. What happened? Michael looked up at us with tear-filled eyes and began to speak in a shaky voice. Mom, Dad. I'm so sorry. I'm the worst father. Calm down, Robert said quietly. Tell us slowly. Michael took a deep breath and continued, seeming a bit more composed. 6 months ago. Sarah left. Sarah? I exclaimed in surprise. Why? Michael continued, looking pained. We hadn't been getting along well lately. I was irritable from work stress, and Sarah and I were arguing a lot. One day, when I came home, Sarah's things were gone, and there was a letter on the table. Michael took a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was the letter Sarah had left. It said, I can't take it anymore. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. I'm leaving Aiden to you. Goodbye. That's what it said. I gasped. I never imagined Sarah would leave home like this. And after that? Robert gently prompted. Michael covered his face with his hands. I panicked. With Sarah gone and the pressure at work piling up, everything started going wrong. I kept making mistakes at work, getting scolded by my boss. His voice was shaking. He had clearly fallen into a state of depression. But what about Aiden? I couldn't help but ask. Why in the garage? Michael answered painfully, at first, we were living normally. But I kept sinking deeper and deeper, it became painful to look at Aiden's face. He looks so much like Sarah, So you told him to stay in the garage. I couldn't contain my anger. Michael nodded slightly. I wanted to run away. From reality, from responsibility, from everything. The room was enveloped in a heavy silence. Aiden had been quietly watching this unfold, but suddenly he stood up and approached Michael. "Dad!" Aiden called out in a small voice. Michael looked at Aiden and started crying again. "Aiden! I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Aiden silently hugged Michael. Seeing this scene, I couldn't stop my own tears. After a while, Michael continued speaking, seeming a bit more composed. I should have asked for help. But my pride got in the way. I couldn't talk to anyone. Even at work, they were concerned about the drop in my performance and suggested counseling, but I refused. "Michael," I said quietly but firmly, "you made mistakes. But it's not too late to fix things. Aiden is your son. He's the precious person you need to protect." Michael slowly raised his head and looked at me. "But you have us," I said. "You don't have to bear this alone. We're family." Robert nodded in agreement. "That's right, Michael. Let's get through this together." Michael sighed deeply, and his shoulders seemed to relax a little. "Thank you. Mom, Dad. What should I do now?" "First, you need to get professional help," I said. "And then, work on repairing your relationship with Aiden. It might take time, but it will definitely work out." Aiden, still clinging to Michael, nodded slightly. At that moment, I felt the strength of family bonds. Yes, we're facing a big problem. But we'll get through it together. That's what family is for. "Come on, let's all have lunch," I said, standing up. "Then we can think about what to do next." Michael and Aiden nodded slightly, and we headed to the kitchen. It's going to be a long road. But we'll move forward, step by step, as a family. With this determination, I opened the refrigerator. After lunch at Michael's house, we discussed our next steps. Gathered around the kitchen table, everyone had a serious expression. "Michael," I cautiously began, "how about letting Aiden stay with us for a while?" Michael looked a bit surprised but quickly nodded. "That might be best for Aiden." Aiden looked at us with anxious eyes. "Am I going to be separated from Dad?" "No, that's not it," I gently explained. "Your dad needs a little rest right now. You'll just be staying at Grandma and Grandpa's house for a while. Dad will come visit you often." Michael put his hand on Aiden's shoulder. "That's right, Aiden. Dad will definitely come to see you. And we'll talk on the phone and have video chats too. We won't really be apart." Aiden seemed to relax a little. "Okay, but Dad, get better soon, okay?" At those words, tears welled up in Michael's eyes. "Yes, I promise." The next day, we took Aiden home with us. On the way, we stopped by Aiden's school to explain the situation. The principal was understanding and promised to send homework and class materials by email until Aiden could return. When we got home, Robert immediately started preparing Aiden's room. It was the room Michael used to use. Aiden looked a bit nervous, but when he entered the room, he seemed relieved. "Is this my room?" he asked. "Yes," I answered. "You can decorate it however you like." That night, after Aiden had gone to bed, Robert and I discussed our plans for the future. "Michael's treatment should be our top priority," I said. Robert nodded in agreement. "Yes, let's look into local mental health clinics. It should be covered by insurance." The next day, we called the Willow Grove Behavioral Health Center. Fortunately, we were able to get an initial appointment for the following week. When we contacted Michael, he agreed. "Thank you, Mom." Michael's voice over the phone sounded a bit more hopeful. "I'm really sorry, but I'll do my best from now on." "That's right, Michael. One step at a time." A week later, Michael had his first counseling session. That night, he called us. "It was easier than I thought." Michael sounded a bit relieved. "The counselor really understood how I felt." "I'm so glad to hear that." I was truly relieved. After that, Michael continued with weekly counseling sessions. Gradually, I could feel the energy returning to his voice. Meanwhile, Aiden's return to school was also a challenge. He had hardly been to school for 6 months. We contacted the local Oak Lane Elementary School and explained the situation. The school counselor, Mrs. Johnson, responded to us. "I understand Aiden's situation. We'll do everything we can to help." Following Mrs. Johnson's suggestion, Aiden started by attending school only in the mornings for the first 2 weeks. Then, he would have special tutoring sessions after school to catch up. On Aiden's first day back at school, I went with him. At the school gate, Aiden stopped nervously. "It's okay, Aiden," I gently pushed his back. "Everyone's waiting for you to come back." Aiden took a deep breath and slowly walked through the school gate. That afternoon, Aiden looked a bit tired, but his eyes were shining. "Everyone remembered me," he reported happily. On the weekend, Michael came to the house to spend time with Aiden. Watching them play board games and play in the garden, I felt a warmth in my chest. "Dad, come again, okay?" As they were saying goodbye, Aiden hugged Michael tightly. "Of course, I'll definitely come," Michael answered gently. After Michael left, Aiden said to me, "Grandma, Dad seems a little better." "Yes," I smiled. "That's because we're all trying our best." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought to myself, the road ahead is still long, but we're definitely moving forward. The bonds of family can overcome any difficulty. Believing this, I quietly closed my eyes. Tomorrow, another new day begins. 3 months have passed since Aiden started living with us. Michael has been regularly attending counseling and slowly regaining his strength. Aiden has also adjusted to school, made friends, and his smiles have increased. We felt that we were slowly but surely moving forward. One Saturday morning, Michael had come to spend time with Aiden. While Robert and I were drinking coffee, watching the two play basketball in the garden, the doorbell suddenly rang. Who could that be? I stood up, a bit surprised. When I opened the door, Sarah was standing there. Seeing her for the first time in 6 months, her hair was cut short and she wore less makeup, but her eyes showed a strong determination. "Hello, Jennifer," Sarah said quietly. "Sarah." I was at a loss for words. Hearing her voice, Michael and Aiden came running from the garden. "Mom?" Aiden exclaimed in surprise. "Sarah." Michael's face turned pale. Sarah looked at Aiden and teared up. "Aiden. I'm sorry." The atmosphere suddenly became tense. We all gathered in the living room. Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak. I've been facing myself for the past 6 months. I've been seeing a psychiatrist, and I've decided to come back to Aiden." Michael spoke with a confused expression. "Sarah, a lot has changed since you left." Sarah nodded. "I understand. But I have the right to raise Aiden. He's my son." At those words, the room seemed to freeze. "Sarah," I spoke carefully, choosing my words, "we understand that you've come back. But we need to think carefully about what's best for Aiden." Sarah answered with a serious expression, "I won't run away anymore. I want to live with Aiden. If necessary, I'll take this to court." At those words, Michael stood up. "Sarah, you can't." As the tension in the room heightened, Aiden spoke in a small voice. "What should I do?" We all looked at Aiden. His eyes were filled with confusion and anxiety. "Aiden," I said gently, "you don't need to decide anything right now. Let's think about this slowly." However, things progressed rapidly. The following week, Sarah filed a petition with the family court for custody. Michael also consulted with a lawyer and decided to take countermeasures. The initial hearing at the Montgomery County Family Court was filled with tension. Judge Brown quietly listened to both parents' arguments. Sarah's lawyer argued, "Our client, having undergone psychiatric treatment, is prepared to fulfill her responsibilities as a mother. She has the right to live with her son." On the other hand, Michael's lawyer countered, "Sarah Wilson abandoned her son for 6 months. During that time, our client has been diligently caring for his son. A stable environment is of utmost importance for the child." After hearing both arguments, the judge quietly said, "This case requires careful consideration. First, we will conduct home visits by a family court social worker and interviews with Aiden. The next hearing will be in 1 month." As we were leaving the courthouse, Sarah approached us. "Jennifer, Robert, can I see Aiden?" Although confused, we allowed a short meeting. Sarah and Aiden talked on a park bench. Watching from a distance, our hearts ached. Over the next month, the family court social worker visited several times, closely examining our living situation. Aiden also had several interviews. Then came the day of the second hearing. The judge spoke with a solemn expression, "I have considered this case very carefully. Both parents clearly love Aiden. However, we must consider what's in the best interest of the child." The courtroom fell silent. At this point, I grant sole custody to Michael Wilson. However, Sarah Wilson is granted regular visitation rights. We will conduct a review in 6 months. Sarah nodded quietly while tears streamed down her face. Michael also had a complex expression. As we were leaving the courthouse, Sarah approached us. I want to cooperate from now on, for Aiden's sake. Michael was silent for a while, but eventually nodded slowly. Yes. For Aiden. We all looked at Aiden. For his future, the adults need to cooperate. I strongly felt that this was not an end, but a new beginning. 6 months passed since the court's decision, and the day of the review arrived. During these 6 months, we had all done our best for Aiden. Michael had been balancing work and parenting, while Sarah had been rebuilding her relationship with Aiden through regular visits. The judge carefully read out the social worker's report. Aiden Wilson's growth has been remarkable. The cooperative attitude of both parents has greatly contributed to his stability. Then, the final judgment was made. Michael Wilson will continue to have sole custody. Sarah Wilson will maintain her current visitation rights. I believe the cooperative system between the parents is essential for Aiden's healthy growth. After leaving the courtroom, we all had relieved expressions. Michael and Sarah shook hands. Let's continue to do our best for Aiden, Michael said. Sarah nodded. Yes, let's do that. That evening, we all gathered for dinner as a family. At the table were Michael, Sarah, Aiden, and Robert and me. It was a scene we couldn't have imagined before. In the middle of the meal, Aiden suddenly stood up. Everyone, listen. We all looked at him in surprise. Aiden seemed a bit nervous but gathered his courage and began to speak. I've decided on my dream for the future. I want to become a counselor. A counselor? Michael asked in surprise. Aiden nodded. Yes. Because both Dad and Mom were helped by counselors, right? I want to help people who are struggling too. At those words, we were all moved speechless. Seeing Aiden, small in stature but with such a big dream, made all our struggles feel worthwhile. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, said, "That's a wonderful dream, Aiden." Michael nodded too. It is. I'm sure you'll become a great counselor. I stood up and hugged Aiden. Grandma is so proud of you. Robert also said gently, "Work hard towards your dream, Aiden." Aiden smiled happily. Yes. Thank you, everyone. That night, as I lay in bed, I quietly shed tears. These were tears of joy. 6 months ago, we were in deep darkness. But now, light is shining through. Certainly, there are still challenges. No family is perfect. But if we have the heart to care for and support each other, we can overcome any difficulty. Aiden's smile taught us that. The next morning, I got up early and made pancakes. As I watched the smiling faces of my family gathering in the kitchen, I felt truly happy. This is our new beginning. Yes, this is our new form of family. Aiden's words, "I want to help people who are struggling," gently echo in my ears. the compassion that has sprouted in him. Perhaps it was nurtured through the hardships we've faced. Our family was hurt and almost broken. But in the process, we learned something. The importance of forgiveness, understanding, and above all, love. Aiden's future will surely be bright. And we will support his dream with all our might. This is how family bonds gain new strength